All right, everyone. I'm glad you guys are here. And we are obviously now just excited to be able to share more information for you around financial education and helping all of us move in the direction that we want to go. And I'm really excited to be able to have a friend of mine on that we met kind of in a weird way. I kind of told some of you guys his story already. I'm going to introduce you to one of a lawyer on our team that has helped us greatly. His name is Tyler Yonge. We were just chatting before I started recording, and he's got such a incredible background that when I met him, I knew that he was someone that I wanted to work with. So Tyler, thanks for being on here. I appreciate it. And let me just say this before I want you to tell a little bit of your story, because the fact that this guy has, how many kids do you have?
We have 6 kids now.
6 kids. And how
Yeah.
old are you?
I'm 36.
36. Yeah. So he's 14 years younger than me and has way more kids. And I'm like, okay, there's a story there. But listen, here's how we met, guys. Um, I don't know if it was an email or a phone call or a voicemail, but I get this message from an attorney basically saying, hey, I've got all of your corporate information, like your minutes and books. And I'm like, is this, you get so much stuff. I'm like, this, I've seen a lot of scam, but I've never seen it coming like this before. This is kind of weird. But something told me I better investigate. And so I reach out to Tyler, and Tyler begins to tell me that the attorney that Lynette and I had used to set up a lot of our asset protection, our wills, our family trust had been disbarred. And, it's one of those things where you hear about it, but you're like, that'll never happen to me, but it might. And so that's how I was introduced to Tyler. So, Tyler, tell them a little bit about yourself other than the fact you got 6 kids.
Okay, gosh, I'll try to keep it brief. I'm a 14th generation Floridian, so my family's been here forever. I don't know, Brandon, if you knew that.
No, I didn't. That's pretty. I don't know anyone that's 14. Like, I need
Yeah,
to go to lunch and hear that story.
right, right. I know that those are like my two openers. 6 kids, 14th generation Floridian, but lived here a while. Went to from Ocala, so small town, or it's getting bigger, but was a small town. UCF for undergrad. Took a couple years off. Worked for a big recycling company that sold multiple times over while I was there, which kind of sparked my interest in the legal field. And decided not to stay with that company. Instead, went to law school. Went to UF. Um, and really fell in love with the estate and business planning kind of practice area. I like the idea of really the attorney that helps people, right? And the guy on the other side is usually the IRS, or it's just about maximizing returns or protecting money. So it wasn't that litigious viewpoint that I had of most attorneys. You're in the courtroom and there's a winner and a loser. Um, so really liked it. Unfortunately, when I graduated, it was a pretty competitive market to get into at that time as a graduating law student. So I for about a year I did insurance defense work, which was the other side of the Morgan and Morgan battlefield. We defended insurance companies and their clients who had claims, and I hated it. I hated it so much that I started a t-shirt company, and I was selling t-shirts out of my garage, right?
Wow. Wow.
And just at one point I was making more money doing that part-time, like in the middle of the night when my wife was asleep. She was pregnant with our first kid, went to bed early. I stayed up, marketed the t-shirt company, and I approached her. I'm like, listen, I made more money selling t-shirts than doing this law job that I hate. I want to just do t-shirts. And she's a CPA, and she was like, well, I'm going to need to see audited financials, not chicken scratch. So needless to say, she didn't let me quit my job, but the job at my current firm opened up shortly thereafter, right? And they did exactly what I wanted to be doing, and it was in Tampa. So, which is where we wanted to be. So it was a perfect fit for me. This firm allowed me to kind of hone my skills, but also develop my book of business at the same time, right? So it's almost like I was starting my own business, my own firm, and with the freedom to generate clients and things like that and network, but at the same time, kind of appease my wife's concerns of how are we going to pay our mortgage and, things like that. So, fast forward, I guess 8 years now, full partner, which means a lot more flexibility, and just love it. So do, again, estate, business planning, asset protection, a little bit of real estate, and just try to balance that with the top priority, which is those kids. My wife and that group of kids. We have 4 girls in a row, and then the last 2 have been boys. So
Wow.
yeah,
That's awesome. I didn't know
very
a
blessed.
lot of that about your story. I probably should have asked more questions. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, that's awesome. And our audience, our partners that we work with, my business partners, have a very similar background where we think we know what we want to do in life. We head down this path with full steam ahead, and then certainly somewhere in there you go, wait a second. A lot of our audience is entrepreneurs that have had to take like 90-degree turns in life a few times
Right.
to figure out their way. And it's one of my passions for doing this because at the end of the day, we've got to be smart with the money we make and our future. And here's one question that I want to ask you before we kind of jump into asset protection corporations. Here's a statistic, and I didn't prep you for this, but I just popped into my mind because I know a lot of people tend to not want to work with lawyers. They're kind of like, and I read a statistic that upwards of 50% of six-figure earners, so people that in most people's worlds, if you're making over 100 grand, you're doing pretty good.
Mhm.
Like upwards of 50% of them don't even have a will.
Yeah.
Like, why do you think, is it just because people are too busy? What, like, are they blinders? Like, why do you think when people, why do they resist?
Yep. You know, I don't know if it's a actual resistance as opposed to just a lack of knowledge, which is why I think what you're doing is super important. I see my job primarily as educating clients or potential clients, right? Once if I can get in front of somebody and they say, well, yeah, why would I need a will? By the end of the conversation, they know why they need planning, and then a small percentage of them are just kind of like, well, not right now or whatever, or they've got some kind of aversion to it because they think once they sign it, they'll die. I've run into like a small percentage of those people. But I think the reason 50% of people don't have any planning is because they just don't know. Or, I even have friends that say, well, when I have an estate, I'll call you. And I'm kind of, because I don't, my net worth is very small. And I say, well, you have life insurance policies? Oh, yeah, big life insurance policies. I'm like,
Yeah,
and you have minor kids, right? Because your kids play with my kids. Oh, yeah, definitely. They
yeah,
just don't know that they're in need of some type of planning at that point, So I think it's just a knowledge thing, primarily, but because once
yeah,
people understand it, then they really say, yeah, this is something that I need to do, which I try to educate clients and really referral sources too. Financial advisors should really be talking about this more, and some of the more credentialed ones kind of include it in their thing. Let's talk about your insurance. Let's talk about your
mhm.
retirement. Let's talk about your estate plan. So that's kind of a big part of the job, really is.
Yeah, I think at least for me, when I was quite a bit younger, anytime I thought of an attorney, I just put dollar signs with it, like, oh my God, that's going to be so expensive. I can't. And I didn't want to take my eyes off the prize. Like if I had $5,000, I certainly didn't want to spend that in professional fees. I wanted to like use that $5,000 to try and make 6,000. And it was bad thinking. It was
Yeah.
stinking thinking. And so I'm glad that I finally made the decision. And that's what I want to do over just the next couple minutes is just, we're not going to dive in too deep, guys, here. There will be a time down the road where we'll dive in a little deeper on asset protection and make that available to you guys. But I wanted to give you some just framework for the next couple minutes so that you can be thinking about your personal situation and what your next move is. So, um, Taylor, first thing I want you to do is kind of talk about because most people are familiar with a will. They kind of know what a will is. And just talk about why, if you don't have one, why you should have one.
Okay. So almost every state, this is a state specific issue. So every state has their own laws, set of laws, and they deal with how property is transferred when someone dies, both from a how do we actually get it to the next person's name, as well as who is that next person, right? So every state kind of sets their own rules. So the reason you would want a will is because you do not agree with what the state assumes, right? So in Florida, there is a standard kind of pattern or flow chart that says, oh, this person died. Okay, were they married? Yes, no, go here. Was it a first marriage, second marriage, kids from prior marriages, existing kids? And they just kind of divide up the estate. And they say, this is what we're going to assume. They didn't draft a will to say otherwise. So this is where it goes. Because if the states didn't do that, we would just have all this money that we don't know where it goes, right? And of course, because the states do that, they put themselves at the very end of the line. So, this guy didn't have a spouse and they didn't have any kids. Did they have some other people? No, great, we'll take it. So that's number one, kind of where it goes. And then the other part is, when do kids get it, or when do people get it, right? So under the state's laws, most of the time, if it's going to a child and they're over 18, they get it. And most people with minor kids in this day and age do not want their 18-year-old to inherit all of their wealth. It would be a disaster. So the states do not, they protect it until 18. So if it's a kid who's 6 or 7 and they inherit something, it stays in a minor account until the kid turns 18. But 18 is way too young. So that's kind of the primary reason why you would want a will, which is kind of like your most basic line of defense in this category. I guess the other big important one is naming a guardian for those children as well, right? So if you don't, the state essentially picks people, and it could be the most vocal person, most vocal one of your relatives, which in your mind would be terrible to have your kids raised by. And there's not a guarantee that all your kids will go to the same person, right? Yeah. So they'll split them up. So that's the second big reason, kind of distribution, where it goes, how it goes, and kind of who's in charge.
And that process is, correct me if I'm wrong here, because I'm not an attorney, that process is called probate, right?
Correct. Yeah. Probate is how you administer someone's will, right? Or if they don't have a will, it's called intestate, and the state basically just assumes that you did make a will, and it says what the state assumed, right? But either way, probate is pleadings and motions before a judge that says, hey, judge, we need to get these assets from this guy's name who died over to these people. Yeah. And it's kind of that legal process to transfer the assets.
And I've heard that even though you have a will, and we're going to talk about family trust here in just a second, that even with a will, it goes into probate, and then the state gets to decide in some cases differently than your will, because there may be some things in your will that aren't legal. Like there may be some things you're requesting that are not legal, and the state's going to decide. Is that true?
That can be true. Yeah, you can put certain things. You could draft something in your will that is contrary to, like the good of the society, and the state could essentially ignore that provision. The part about a will going through probate, the most common thing I hear is, well, I have a will, so I'm avoiding probate. And it's the exact opposite, right? Wills have to be probated. Once you sign a will, great. You can change it as much as you want up until you die. So it really doesn't mean much until you die. And then at that point, it is only effective if it's blessed essentially by a judge. So there are ways to basically pass assets outside of your will, so to speak, right? And I always go through, I say, the first place you look is ownership. So if you and I own something jointly, and I pass away, let's say for this argument, you're the owner, right? So it doesn't matter what my will said, you get it. Or let's say I have a life insurance policy and I list you as the beneficiary. And then my will says everything goes to my kids. It doesn't matter what my will says. The life insurance policy is going to look and they're going to say Brandon Cunningham, beneficiary, and they're going to write you a check. So for some people, that's all of their assets, retirement accounts, insurance policies, checking, savings, things like that. And they just list beneficiaries. And I say, great, your will, you could do a will. It's not even going to come into play, right? But if there are assets that become subject to the terms of a will, they have to go to probate.
Yeah, that was my reason in bringing it up is either way, if it goes into probate with a will, you've got a judge, someone stranger that's involved in your family's future, and that always kind of worried me. We're from Louisiana, and I was young when it happened, but my grandfather passed away, and I watched my family go through a mess of figuring things out because he was an entrepreneur. He owned shrimp boats and real estate, and he had land that the Texaco was drilling oil on. And it was like, ooh, it got weird really quick. And that was when I was young. And so let's do this before we jump to the trust. And I'm not, I want to give the audience a range because again, I think the reason why people don't use attorneys is they're afraid of the money, like cost. What's like if someone's going to do a will, I know they can do it for free, but if they're going to get an attorney, like what's the range? Is it 500 to 5,000? Is it 1,000? What should someone expect to pay a range to get a will done?
Yeah, this is going to be a wide range depending on the state and even the city, and then the kind of the package that you want, right?
Yeah.
And like, yeah, there are free websites. I actually helped develop a website that does kind of freebie wills, and and that can be appropriate. But I would say that I liken it to like, yeah, you could also do your taxes for free on TurboTax.
Right.
Or you could pay, your CPA for $400 for the year. And now you've got an actual fiduciary advisor behind that work that you can call up and ask questions to. So that's kind of, I guess, the value add. And, for just a will, you'll find an attorney, that would do it for $400, $300 for just a will. We typically, and I could talk about it maybe later, we package up documents, will and your advanced directives and things like that into a package. And for an individual, like our lowest package might probably be like $750 or something. Yeah. And then you can get into more advanced planning, husband, wife, prior marriages, gifting, things like that. And yeah, you're in the 4,000 or 5,000 range. But it's going to be, I would say, let's look at it like a bell curve, right? 90% of clients are going to be in the range of 1,000 to 3,000.
Yeah.
And there's going to be some on the tail end that are less than 1,000, $400 or $500, and there's going to be some on the tail end that need bigger planning, $5,000-6,000.
Yeah, that's all I want to do is give them some framework.
Yeah, and that's probably accurate. You add a little bit of premium if your firm you're working with is downtown with a lot of overhead, and or if you're in a city that the median income is higher. Like the same package in Ocala, my hometown, is probably half the price.
Yeah.
Just because that's the market here. But
all right, so for us guys, before we even had met with Tyler, with the previous attorney, I knew that we needed a trust, and the reason I wanted to get a trust was to protect the assets from liability. In my mind going in, it was, unfortunately, we live in a world where people are very quick to want to sue other people for various things, and you've got to protect what you've worked for. And so my original reason, because we were in real estate, and that's, you got people in rentals. What happens if, there's a fire? What happens if there's a million different things, someone's murdered on your property or someone trips and falls. And so I knew I needed a trust. So Tyler, talk a little bit about the advantages of stepping up beyond the will to a trust. What does a trust do? Why would someone want a trust above the will?
Yep. So The primary reason people want trusts is really to avoid that probate process, right? And it's again state specific. Some states probate processes are very easy, right? You tell the court, hey, these are the guy's assets. This is what we want to do with it. They say, great. Come back 2 months later, tell me how it went, and you're on your way. That's not the case in most states, though, right? Most states, it's a longer process, can last up to a year, and it's not an uncommon one, right? You get the opportunity, not you, your creditors have the opportunity to make claims against that estate. So all of these things happen within this probate context. You mentioned a couple, you got a judge, you don't know what a judge is going to rule. You got other family members that come in, and you have to pay your attorney, right? You have to pay your attorney and you have to pay your executor. So you lose a lot of money kind of just off the top in fees. Not to mention time and the fact that it's all public record and all this stuff. So what people do on the probate side is they make these revocable trusts, and I'll talk about the difference between revocable and irrevocable. They make a family trust, a revocable trust. It's like a will substitute, right? And I'm not going to go into the legalities of how it works, but it avoids that probate process. So instead of having to do all that, hire the attorney, go before the judge, wait that time frame, things in your family trust avoid that. So that's most people's concern. The next level up is asset protection, as you mentioned. Revocable trusts provide asset protection for these probate costs that we talked about. From a creditor standpoint, you can build in a lot of protections for your beneficiaries, your heirs. So, their creditors can't come after their inheritance. If you are seeking liability protection from your potential creditors while you're still alive, now we're into irrevocable trust world. Mm-hmm. And I liken those to more of a corporate entity, right? You create them while you're alive. They have a set of governing rules, like the bylaws of a corporation, and certain beneficiaries, which kind of you could liken to stockholders or something, and the trustee, which you would liken to like a corporate president or something, manages that asset for the benefit of those people. So
the reason I like the trust, guys, is and the reason this is possible is basically if I pass away this afternoon, Lynette and I have already predetermined who owns what the interests are, because the trust never passes away. Like Lynette and I can disappear, and the trust is still in place. And so the only time there's taxation or arguments or litigation is when ownership usually is changing hands. And so just know, guys, that when you set up a trust, which is going to lead me to the next question for you, the trust now owns things. So if you put a corporation in the trust owns the corporation. Brandon and Lynette doesn't own it. So if we disappear, nothing's changed. And so talk about for a second, Tyler, what should a trust own? If you have a family trust, what should it own? Should it own everything? Like, what should it own?
Yeah, that's a good question. It definitely should not own everything. So depending on your state, from an asset protection standpoint, there's sometimes there's better ways to own things. Like Brandon and Lynette could own things as husband and wife. In Florida, we have a special protection recognized for husband and wife ownership called tenants by the entireties. So, joint investment accounts, joint checking savings, those we don't actually want owned by the trust, right? But in order to coordinate that asset protection goal with your probate avoidance goals, you can simply name your trust as a beneficiary. And then it's kind of a holding pot that if you both happen to die simultaneously, it then goes directly to the trust outside of probate. And now you've built in all that stuff, for the kids. But some things, you don't have the ability to list a beneficiary. And that's where corporations come in. Corporations, LLCs, partnerships, all of those entities, you can't put a beneficiary on it. So that's where it's most appropriate. Those things will be directly owned by the trust while you're alive. We typically put in personal property, a lot of times real estate, depending on the use of the real estate. Um, so, and some people, it's kind of a preference. I mean, if they're not married and they don't have that, or they're in a state that doesn't afford them certain levels of protection in that ownership that I discussed, then they could have their account, their checking, their savings, things like that, owned by their trust, and that avoids probate, just like it would if you listed the trust as a beneficiary. So, that's kind of my analysis when I go through with clients. I send a questionnaire that says, I don't really care about the amounts of these assets. I just want to know the types of assets that you have. And then we use that as a checklist to say, okay, at the end, once we've created everything, how are we going to title stuff? How are we going to fund the trust? What is going to be owned as husband and wife? What is going to be owned by your trust? What is going to be owned by this company that is then owned by your trust? So that's a big part of it. Kind of correctly funding everything.
Yeah. And another advantage, guys, like it's not an unknown thing that money unfortunately causes a lot of family issues. And if someone passes away, what you don't want is your kids hating each other for the rest of their lives because they're fighting over money or this battle. And so another advantage of trust, Tyler kind of talked about, alluded to earlier, is the deal by 18 years old. In a trust, I know, like for us, we have picked appropriate times in our children's lives when they will have access to we have created, the wealth that we've built. On top of that, we've got certain people that will care for them, fit their physical needs. Like if we pass away before our children are adults, we've got certain people that will take care their physical needs, like where will they go, who will take care of them, that are different than the people who will financially be the caretakers of the money. And so a trust allows you this ability, so that you can really dial in what you would want to happen. And listen, to trust too, like let's say I don't die, but I'm in some type of physical, mental state where I'm alive, but I'm not able to function. A trust will tell everyone who's in control. If I'm not in control of my thinking ability or anything like that. So don't think of trust or is like after I'm dead too. This is something that you can have. Is that true, Tyler?
That's true. Yeah, that's the main difference. It's that kind of the mechanism by which it avoids the probate process, right? Wills are they are not effective until someone dies. That then they're turned on, right? Trusts are effective when you sign them, and they continue on. They become unchangeable once you die. So it's this slight difference. Seems like it's not a big deal, but as you mentioned, because they're effective when you sign them, they can own things, and they can govern those things that they own even while you're alive. And just while you're alive and you have capacity, you're in charge of everything. But then you're right. If you lose capacity, the trust already knows what to do. You've outlined that, and a successor trustee can come in and manage the assets for you or for others. So yeah, it's a living document. That's sometimes why they call them living trusts, that then survives your death, like you said, and goes
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. Well, I know we could talk about this forever. You're busy, and I want to keep this moving for everyone.
Yeah.
You've helped us set up some corporations, and a lot of the people that are going to watch this have corporations. And a lot of times the conversation twists over to a tax thing, so we're not obviously going to go there. But why, if for those that don't have a corporation, why should people have a corporation, just in general?
Yeah. There's a big, some like macro reasons, right? Like you mentioned, tax purposes. Um, but I'll try not to cross over into that world. But really it's about asset protection, about liability protection. And when I describe this, I kind of describe two types of liability, right? I call it inside liability and outside liability. So most people, when they form a corporation, they're doing it to protect from inside liability. I'm going to start a company. I don't want something that happens within my company to be able to come out and take my personal assets, my savings account, my other stock, or whatever. And so they say, oh, so I need to form a corporation. I say, that's correct. If you were operating as a sole proprietor and you had a piece of property and somebody slipped on it, as part of your store or something, or you sold a product that hurt somebody, they're going to sue you personally, and now all of your personal assets are at risk. Instead, they say, well, no, I'm not going to be a sole proprietor. I'm going to be a corporation. or a company, a limited liability company, LLC. And now they've insulated themselves from that risk, right? The other thing that people don't really think about, but is almost more important, is what I call outside liability, right? So it's not related to your job, but you're sued. And the most common is a car accident. So you're in a car accident on in your personal car, and it was your fault, and they sue you, and your insurance goes to trial, whatever, insurance pays out their portion, and you owe the guy $500,000. If you had your business over here and it was not contained within an LLC, they could say, great, that's not a company, that's not a corporation, that's you. So we're taking it, and we're taking all your accounts receivable, and we're taking whatever. So if you're in a corporation, it's somewhat protected, depends on the ownership. If you're in an LLC, it's even more protected. So Brandon, I think you use the term corporation to kind of encapsulate all these entities, but there are different, there are different ones, corporations, partnerships, LLCs, kind of all these different entities. But that is the big reason. And again, that is a little state specific, the different levels of protection that different entities are afforded. So it can get, the recommendation can change depending on what state you're in and what kind of business you're conducting. But overall, it's about building a silo, basically, for different income streams or different assets.
Which, guys, I'm gonna tell you from experience, because like in Florida, you can quickly, in just a few minutes, go out and get a business ID number. You can form a corporation pretty quickly in Florida. The question then becomes, have you formed it under the right type of corporation that's going to serve your needs? Which is why, same thing with like a will. Like you can think of starting a corporation like just getting a will. That's great, you got one. Now, did you set it up correctly? Is it the right type? So it's important, not only do you have a corporation to protect assets, but have you set up the right type corporation for the business that you're going to be operating? Which leads me to the next question. Like I know we've got several corporations, and some of that was in real estate in the past, was still even. And like we had a trailer park, and there's certain type liabilities that come along with a trailer park that are higher risk.
Right.
And so talk about why you may even want more than one type corporation.
Yeah, that's the different silos that I kind of alluded to. So you don't want, if you had one entity that contained all of your business ventures, and one is over here and it's selling a widget that has no liability associated with it, and you're making $100 per widget and you're selling 100 a day, it's just clockwork. And then that same company owns a trailer park where people are sometimes, I don't want to say anything bad about trailer parks, but some high risk, high liability area.
I'll tell you guys, I'm glad you said that. Like my biggest concern was some of these trailers were 30 years old. And in the wintertime, I was petrified when the temperature dropped that they were going to be plugging space heaters in all these rooms and causing a fire. Like literally, it kept me up at night. So it's not about, it's legit things that can happen. Even great, it's not about the people, it's just maybe the trailer or the home you're providing might be a liability.
Yeah, it could be as simple as a rental property that the tenant calls and says, hey, our switch kind of pops every time we turn it on. You're like, yeah, I'll get out there to fix it, and you don't, and it starts a fire and burns the whole place down. People get third-degree burns and they're scarred for life. Okay, you don't want them, that creditor, that person that's suing you, to have access to your income stream from your widget sales, right? That's just turning money, no liability. So the reason you want multiple entities is to create these separate silos and kind of insulate liability from each other. It's most common in real estate, and then high risk service businesses like medical professionals or things like that. But product sales certainly come with their own product liability. So I mean, to be honest, there's liability in almost everything. So it's just kind of a function of how comfortable are you with cross collateralizing these two businesses? I mean, I have doctor clients that, he's a plastic surgeon, and he separated out his practice into 4 different entities. He's got his reconstructive, and then he's got his like wound care, and then he's got his cosmetic, and then he's got this, because he's like, these guys never sue anybody. and these people always sue, you know? So he's basically putting them in a little box and saying, I'm providing the same services pretty much to all these people, but I'm insulating the risk over here.
That's smart.
Yeah.
That's smart. And that's why I want to educate this audience, because if you don't think about these things, the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years of your life can disappear pretty quickly. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
why this is an important conversation. Kind of to conclude this thing a little bit, feel free, Tyler, to let them know how. I mean, I know you're in Florida, and I've enjoyed working with you. In fact, we gotta talk soon about this other marine business that I need, because I need it set up correctly, and I got to
Right.
get that thing done. But how can this audience contact you to get more information, contact you, figure out maybe if you're a good fit to work with them?
Yeah. I'd say the easiest way is to just email me. My email is Tyler, Tyler, at dwyfirm.com, Delta Whiskey Yankee Firm. You could also go to the website, dwy.com or dwyfirm.com. The phone number, I wouldn't, we have a main phone line, 813-983-8000. Any of those methods. Email is definitely best. I get that on my phone. And for the people that are out of state, feel free to reach out. I attend a week-long conference every year. That is actually in Florida, but we get people from all over the country that come in that do the same type of work, and it comes with a directory. So I'm happy to kind of pull out the directory and say, oh, where are you? You're in Kansas. Okay. These are the 10 people that attended that from Kansas. They know, they'll do the same type of work that I do, and happy to kind of just pass that on. So if people want to kind of just use me as a resource there, I'm happy to kind of find who they're looking for in their state. But yeah, certainly anybody in Florida, happy to help. And, you know,
Yeah, you've been great for us, and I love the fact that you got 6 kids, and that you were printing T-shirts at one time, because that hits home, man.
yeah,
That is awesome stuff. I think
I love, I love the entrepreneurial guys, man. I'm still involved in multiple random businesses. I've got some clients slash friends that are doing a kids TV show, and I got other guys that are doing a venue and they're caterers, and I'm kind of involved in both of those things. So I like new ventures and startups and entrepreneurial type thinking. So
That's why we get along.
kindred spirit. Yeah.
That's why we get
Yeah.
along so well. I like that. And listen, you're following your own advice, multiple streams of income, and I bet you have more than one corporation. So,
Yeah. I have quite a few. Yeah.
hey, thanks for being on here. Appreciate. I know you're busy. I know the audience is going to really appreciate this. And my hope is that after watching this, guys, you at least get a will. And then I would hope that if you don't have the trust yet, that you work that way. Or even if you have a trust, it needs to be revisited every year. We had to make some changes to ours recently. So thank you guys for being on here. Thank you, Tyler. And
Yeah. Good to see you, man.
all right, man. Bye bye.
Take it easy.